My name is Tiffany, and I'm 29 years old. I work in a small but steady office job, tucked into the corner of a high-rise downtown. My life has never been flashy, but it's always been grounded. My mother raised me after my father passed away when I was just 6. He had been battling a chronic illness for a while, but even through his pain, I remember him smiling when he came home. He used to lift me onto his shoulders and walk around the living room, as if I were the most important thing in the world. After he passed, my mother became everything. She worked tirelessly, 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure I never felt his absence too harshly. And even though we didn't have much, we had warmth. My father's former boss, Kyle, stayed in touch over the years. He used to stop by during the holidays and check in now and then, always telling me that if I ever wanted a place at Sunrise Bank, the door was open. But I never took him up on it. I wanted to do something for myself, to carve my path. Last month, my colleague Nina tried setting me up with a guy she swore was a great catch. I resisted at first. I wasn't really in the mood for dating, but she kept insisting. Just one dinner, she said. Worst case, you get a free meal. I should have trusted my gut. His name was Yosef, and he showed up 15 minutes late without so much as a text. When he finally walked in, he didn't even look for me. He just stood at the entrance of the restaurant, waiting like he expected me to come greet him. I waved him over, trying to keep things polite, and the moment he sat down, he launched into a monologue about his father, who happens to be the current CEO of Sunrise Bank. I smiled tightly and nodded, already feeling boxed in. Yosef talked about legacy and power as if they were personality traits. People with real roots in the city, he said, swirling his wine. They don't have to explain themselves. They're already known. He didn't ask me a single question about my life, my work, or my interests. Every sentence seemed to end with some jab about how people from small families don't understand how big decisions work. It wasn't even halfway through the meal when he leaned back and said, "So, when do I meet your parents?" I blinked, confused. "What?" "Your parents," he repeated, as if I hadn't heard him the first time. "I want to see what kind of household shaped you. It's only fair, since I come from very specific standards." I tried to laugh it off. "Well, it's just my mom and me," I said. "And we're very private." He didn't let it go.
Come on.
"I'm serious. If I'm going to invest my time in someone, I need to know what kind of stock they come from."
His words hit like a slap. I felt something inside me shrink.
I picked up my glass of water just to have something to hold, anything to steady myself. This wasn't just about curiosity. This was inspection. Judgment. I excused myself before dessert. As I walked out into the cool air, I felt lighter with each step. But his words still clung to me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just one bad date. This was the beginning of something deeper, something I couldn't yet name. I didn't want to go to that dinner. After everything Yosef said during our date, I had already decided he wasn't someone I wanted in my life. But he kept messaging me, insisting the dinner had been arranged by his parents and it was just a formality. He promised it would be brief, respectful, and his words, good for both sides. I should have said no. But my mother, ever the graceful woman she is, told me, sometimes you have to show up just to show them who you are. So we went. The dinner was held at a private room in an upscale restaurant I'd only ever walked past before. A server in white gloves opened the door for us. Inside, the room was dim and silent except for the soft clinking of glasses. Yosef's parents were already seated. His father, Gregory, barely looked up. His mother, Morgan, smiled at us so thin it barely counted. Yosef stood, a little too quickly, like he was trying to compensate for the coldness of the room. "Mom, Dad, this is Tiffany, and her mother." Morgan extended her hand toward my mother and then me, her eyes scanning us both in one swift glance.
"Oh."
"I thought you would be bringing your father," she said, casually placing her napkin on her lap. There was a pause. A tight silence. I cleared my throat. "My father passed away when I was 6. Morgan raised her eyebrows, not in sympathy, but in a theatrical kind of surprise. "Oh,
No one told me that.
such a shame. That must have been difficult growing up." My mother smiled politely. We managed just fine. I'm sure you did, Morgan said, reaching for her wine. Still, no father figure around? That leaves certain gaps in upbringing. Gregory, who had remained quiet, suddenly chimed in. It's not just about survival, though, is it? It's about what kind of values are passed down. Generational strength, tradition. Yosef's father and grandfather were both in banking. There's a sense of responsibility in that. And pressure, my mother added, her tone warm but clear. Though some values, like respect, come from any household that knows love. Morgan didn't reply to that. She just tilted her glass and took a sip, letting the silence fill in the rest. I could feel my cheeks warming. Every word out of her mouth had been carefully sharpened, designed to cut. Throughout the meal, the insults kept coming. They never raised their voices, never used ugly words, but everything they said was dressed in condescension. They asked what school I'd attended, where we lived, and what social networks my mother belonged to, as if any answer other than what they wanted would confirm that we were not their kind of people. At one point, Morgan leaned in and said with a smile, "You must have a lot of strength to navigate certain social circles without the usual family structure." I looked over at my mother, who remained calm, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. That calmness gave me strength. After dessert, when the waiter cleared the plates, my mother reached for her purse. "Thank you for the dinner. Tiffany and I have an early morning, so we'll be going." Morgan barely nodded. Gregory didn't even acknowledge us. As we stood, my mother added casually, "We'll be moving our accounts from Sunrise Bank this week." That got Gregory's attention. He looked up, genuinely confused. Was there a service issue? My mother smiled politely. "Just a personal choice." Morgan waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't trouble yourself. I doubt it'll make much of a difference." I was already holding the door open, but I saw my mother pause at those words. She looked over her shoulder, voice soft but steady. "Respect isn't something you reserve for those who match your wealth. It's something you offer because it reflects your own." We left without another word. Outside, as the cool air hit my face, I felt a quiet mix of anger and pride. They saw us as small, but they had no idea what kind of strength it took to hold our heads high in a room like that. Let them laugh at our names on the account closure forms. They'd remember them soon enough. We didn't wait long. The very next morning, my mother and I walked into the Sunrise Bank branch where we'd held our joint account for years. We were quiet, focused. I could still hear Morgan's voice from the night before, light and dismissive. I doubt it'll make much of a difference." That sentence stayed with me like a thorn pressed into my skin. We sat with a representative and requested to close the account. She asked if something had gone wrong. My mother simply said, "No longer a fit." The woman processed the request with a polite nod, clicking through screens, transferring funds. What Yosef's family didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I wasn't just any account holder. My father, before his illness, had been a senior advisor to Kyle Wren, the former CEO of Sunrise Bank. They were close, trusted friends. Kyle had helped my father secure investments, cover treatments, and make sure we were cared for even after his passing. And Kyle Wren? He wasn't just my father's friend. He was my grandfather. My mother had asked him to stay out of the public side of my life, to let me grow up without the shadow of his reputation hanging over me.
He respected that.
We'd visit him on weekends, quietly. Never at public events, never in the press. Even now, most people don't know. And I never felt the need to flaunt it. But that dinner, that night, something shifted. What they also didn't know was that Kyle still oversaw a small number of accounts at the bank. And one of them, a trust fund holding nearly $7 million, was mine. He had set it up when I was 9. Every year, he gave me updates, but I never touched the money. I wanted to earn my living. But now, the name, Wren, would appear on every internal record related to the trust and every flag on our account closure. That afternoon, I stopped by Kyle's home. He lived in a quiet estate just outside the city, surrounded by gardens and bookshelves lined with old ledgers and family photos. He was sitting on the veranda reading. As soon as he saw my face, he put the book down. "I heard," he said gently, as if he already knew. Morgan never did like being challenged. I sat beside him. They treated Mom like we were disposable, like we didn't matter. His face hardened just slightly. You matter more than they'll ever understand. I want to move the trust, I said. Somewhere else. Somewhere that respects the people tied to it. Kyle nodded. Then, that's what we'll do. I'll make the arrangements. By the next week, the paperwork had been filed. The trust would be moved. Investment portfolios, long-term bonds, legacy stock options, repositioned away from Sunrise Bank. Kyle was methodical and calm, but even he couldn't hide the slight satisfaction in his eyes as he finalized the transition. Meanwhile, Yosef was still texting me like nothing had happened. Mom thinks you were just overwhelmed at the dinner, one message read. Don't take everything so personally. That's just how she is. He had no idea. He had no idea that behind the scenes, the very foundation of their family's financial pride was cracking. No idea that the bank's longest-standing legacy trust was leaving their books. That Kyle's quiet retirement would soon feel very loud. They thought we were small. They thought my mother and I were just another pair of nobodies walking out the door. They didn't know that the door we closed would echo. Weeks passed. We heard nothing from Yosef or his parents after we moved the account and the trust. But I knew something had shifted. Whispers had started circulating through the financial community about sudden portfolio exits, dropped partnerships, and a notable trust being relocated. The kind of whispers that make executives nervous. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, we received a formal invitation. It came in the form of an embossed envelope delivered to our apartment. The note inside was short. Ms. Tiffany Wren, we request your presence and that of your mother at a meeting regarding account transitions and internal matters. Sunrise Bank, Executive Boardroom, Thursday at 10 a.m. No explanation. Just a time and place. My mother raised an eyebrow when she read it. I suppose they'd done the math. We arrived exactly on time. The security guard recognized us this time, offering a polite nod as he held the elevator door. On the top floor, the receptionist guided us into the boardroom, a sleek space with glass walls, mahogany chairs, and a long conference table already filled with stiff, uncomfortable faces. Yosef stood as we entered. His father, Scott, remained seated but gave a tight nod. Morgan sat at the far end of the table, lips pressed together, avoiding my gaze. Thank you for coming, Scott began. We wanted to personally express our regret for the way things unfolded. Yosef stepped forward. We had no idea about your connection to Mr. N. If we had. I held up a hand. That's the problem. You think respect should only be given if there's a name or a number attached to it. Scott shifted in his chair. Morgan crossed her arms. Yosef tried again. Tiffany, if there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, I said, my tone steady. You looked at me and my mother, judged us for not fitting your idea of worth, and dismissed us. Your entire demeanor, your words at that dinner, they weren't about misunderstanding. They were about entitlement. The room went quiet. I could feel their discomfort growing. Then the door opened. Kyle walked in. He didn't speak at first, just nodded to me and my mother, then took the empty seat beside me. His presence changed the air in the room. Suddenly, everyone sat up straighter. I've served this institution for over 35 years, he began. And in that time, I've seen leadership that earned trust, and leadership that undermined it. His eyes locked on Scott. When I stepped back, I expected the values we built this bank on to continue. Integrity, service,
Dignity.
not vanity. Morgan finally spoke. Kyle, we didn't mean any harm. We simply didn't know. You didn't care to know. Kyle cut in sharply. And now you care because the trust is gone. The partnerships are gone. The legacy you depended on no longer supports you. Yosef looked visibly pale. We're trying to fix this. I'm not interested in fixes, Kyle replied. I'm interested in consequences. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. Morgan's voice filled the room. No father figure around? That leaves certain gaps in upbringing. Then Scott's voice, smooth and dismissive. It's about generational strength, tradition. And finally, Morgan again. I doubt it'll make much of a difference. When the recording ended, no one moved. No one spoke. I leaned forward. That was the moment you lost everything you assumed you controlled. Cal placed a firm hand over mine. Effective immediately, he said, turning to the others. I will not support the continuation of Scott or Yosef in any leadership capacity at Sunrise Bank. I will also be making a public statement regarding my separation from the bank's current direction. Scott's face drained of color. Morgan looked like she wanted to disappear. Yosef glanced at me, eyes pleading. Tiffany. I stood up. This isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. You don't get to define people by their background and walk away untouched. Then my mother rose beside me. Her voice, calm and steady, echoed through the silence. Respect is earned, not inherited. We left the room with our heads high. Behind us, the empire they thought was unshakable had begun to crack. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. Just a week after the boardroom confrontation, Scott was officially removed from his position as CEO. Kyle announced a press release that was brief but clear. Effective immediately, Sunrise Bank will undergo leadership restructuring to align with its founding values of respect, trust, and community. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. Yosef was offered a symbolic position in the compliance department, a move meant to save face, but he didn't last long. 2 days in, and he turned in his resignation. The whispers about his behavior had already reached investors and industry insiders. The story had leaked in pieces, just enough to raise questions. And when money people start to doubt, reputations don't fade. They collapse. Kyle didn't stop with titles. He pulled quiet strings in the background, just like he always had. Over the next few weeks, speaking engagements were canceled, board appointments revoked, and previous supporters of Scott's leadership quietly distanced themselves. Kyle never raised his voice. He never demanded revenge. But in rooms Yosef and Scott used to walk into with ease, their names began to bring discomfort. Morgan, once known for hosting elite charity events and pushing her influence across social circles, faded fastest. With the family's wealth frozen and under audit, she was no longer the benefactor, she was a liability. And without the safety net of status, people stopped pretending to like her. Eventually, she took on a part-time role at a small consulting firm downtown, the kind that did quiet PR for clients in trouble. But Morgan's attitude, rigid, patronizing, and out of touch, didn't blend well with modest office life. She was let go within a month. A few weeks later, someone told me they saw her working retail in a luxury department store, folding scarves near the window displays. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I just felt still. The world had turned, that's all. And it had finally turned without her at the center. As for me, I didn't say much publicly.
I didn't post online.
I didn't gloat. I showed up for work every day, met my deadlines, and drank my coffee in peace. People asked questions, of course. Curious glances in the elevator, subtle comments at the copier. But I let the rumors swirl around me like a fog I didn't need to step into. I had no interest in rehashing what happened. I didn't need to. My silence was deliberate. My actions had already spoken. I'd walked into a room where I was treated like nothing and left that room having quietly shaken the ground beneath it. My mother and I opened a new account with a different bank, one that didn't ask for anything beyond identification and a signature. Kyle helped us invest a portion of the trust in a scholarship fund under my father's name. The rest stayed where it belonged, with people who respected the weight it carried. Sometimes dignity doesn't look like shouting. It doesn't look like payback. Sometimes it just looks like walking away with everything intact, while those who mocked you are left to clean up the pieces of what they once called power. I used to think dignity came from keeping your head down and doing the right thing, even when others didn't. And for most of my life, I lived that way, soft-spoken, steady, moving through rooms without demanding space. But after everything that happened, I understand something new. Dignity also means knowing when to speak, when to walk away, and when to let your silence speak louder than any raised voice. After the dust settled, my life became quieter. No late-night texts from Yosef. No more meetings or rumors swirling around my name. Just me, my mother, and the people who had always stood by me. Kyle called often, not to talk about the fallout, but to ask about my work, my goals, my thoughts on starting my venture one day. He didn't treat me like someone who had just survived something ugly. He treated me like someone who had stepped into her power. My mother, my anchor, remained the same as she'd always been. Unshaken.
Wise.
She never gloated. She never told me, "I told you so." She just hugged me in the kitchen one night while we were cleaning dishes and said, "Your father would be proud." Those words meant more to me than anything Morgan or Scott could have offered an apology. I visited my grandparents more often after that. Kyle had slowed down a little, walking with a cane now, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Sometimes we would sit in his study in silence, both of us reading. Other times, he'd pull out one of my father's old notebooks, pointing to ideas they once dreamed up together. I think that's what hurt him most, not the insult to me, but the dismissal of the family his son had built with love, not wealth. And through all of it, I didn't shout. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't tell my coworkers everything. I didn't throw the story in anyone's face. I just kept living. I channeled the anger into plans. I used the trust to start a small foundation that funds education for girls raised by single parents. Quietly. No press, no ribbon cuttings. Just action. Just a purpose. Nina, my ever-enthusiastic friend, tried to set me up again recently. "This one's nice," she said. "Respectful. Comes from a good family."
I smiled at that.
"I think I'll wait," I told her. "Right now, I just want to breathe. Because after everything, peace feels like the rarest luxury. And for the first time in my life, I'm not chasing anything. Not approved. No recognition. Not love from people who have never seen me. I'm just being. The girl who once walked quietly through rooms is still here, but now, she walks with her head high, her steps measured, her silence full of meaning. And that, to me, is the most powerful revenge of all. One Sunday morning, with sunlight pouring through the windows and the scent of fresh bread in the air, my mother and I drove out to visit Kyle again. The road was quiet, lined with trees just starting to bloom, and there was a calmness in the air that reminded me how far we'd come. Kyle's home had always been a place of peace, but now it felt like something more. Like a reminder that strength doesn't always come with noise or visibility. It often grows in silence, in the small, steady moments that other people overlook. When we arrived, Kyle was in the garden, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and slowly watering his hydrangeas. He looked up, smiled, and waved us over. My mother took the basket of food she had packed, her homemade peach cobbler, his favorite, and walked ahead while I trailed behind, taking in the moment. We sat together under the awning, the three of us. No grand conversation, no talk of banks or reputations. Just shared memories, quiet laughter, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be proven. At one point, Kyle looked at me and said, "You remind me of your father." I looked down at my hands and smiled. "I hope so." He nodded. "Not just in how you carry yourself, but in how you lead, with care, with principle, even when people don't deserve your grace." Later, while my mother helped him prepare tea inside, I walked along the garden path alone. I wasn't thinking about Morgan or Yosef or what they might be doing now. I wasn't thinking about loss or injustice. I was thinking about what I'd gained.
Clarity.
Boundaries.
Peace.
I no longer cared about impressing people who measured worth in last names or dollar amounts. I didn't want to build a life that looked impressive from the outside but felt hollow within. I wanted something real, rooted,
honest.
As I stood near the roses, I thought about how long it took to get here, about the days I felt invisible, the moments I bit my tongue, and the silence I once saw as weakness. But now I knew better. That silence wasn't weakness, it was control. It was strength disguised as patience. My story wasn't one of vengeance. It wasn't about making someone else fall. It was about rising, quietly, deliberately on my terms. I wasn't in a rush to meet someone new, or climb some career ladder, just to prove a point. I was building a foundation, slow and solid, made of values passed down from my parents and shaped by experience. As the sky turned to soft gold, my mother called out from the porch, asking if I wanted more tea. I turned and nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Contentment.
Real, complete contentment. I walked back slowly, knowing the world hadn't changed, but I had. And that was enough.